Hi, this is Jeff Nyquist, and this is another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm in the United States. My co host Alex Benesch is in Germany. We were talking about secret societies, the occult, the influences on politics. It's a huge subject. We kind of got started in it talking about Gertis Faust. And of course, we're going to talk about Julius Evola today, how this is influencing the right, how it's being used, how the Duginists, the people who follow Alexander Dugin, are using Evola, how people like Steve Bannon is fascinated by Evola, Julius Evola, and maybe we'll begin. Maybe you can tell our listeners who Julius Evola was, and why he's important, and about some of his books.
Well, he certainly brought forward a template, and this template has been used by others. It's sort of a universal template. And so that's why you can see the same pattern in Dugin's writings. You can see the same patterns with the German right wing or extreme right wing today. You can see it in Austria, you can see it in Britain, you can see it in France, you can see it everywhere. And of course, the Russians have infiltrated this movement or this international network very heavily. So, in essence, the Russians are building on this network that's actually fairly old, and it's much bigger than people think, because there are many front groups. It's like a funnel, and all these ways lead to the same targets. So these right wingers, they need many people who are followers. They play certain parts, they play certain roles, but not everybody is supposed to fully understand this. As I said, Russia is all over these networks, and this network is much more sophisticated than what people can see on the news. So,
I should add in there that Sufi Islam, which has a lot of occult magic practices, you have Kabbalah in Judaism. You have, of course, Hinduism. You have Chinese Taoism. You have Buddhism, of course. So you have all these philosophies which have esoteric or magical occult ideas in them. And then, of course, you have esoteric Christianity, which is talked about. You've got the occult revival in Europe. You've got the pagans. And it seems like Dugin has people in all these areas. Oh, and in the Orthodox Church, in the Catholic Church, some places, trying to influence. They talk about ecumenism. They're kind of taking Eurasianism and the occult and anti-Americanism together with what they call tradition, which is really it's, what do they call it? Perennialism. That is, there's truth in all religions, and we're going to bring all religions together in one. And this is a real movement. This is going on. This is on the internet, and it's especially, it started years ago in non-English speaking countries. Dugin did not like to take English speakers as students in these online courses, in these groups that he set up, but they were educating 20 years ago, 30 years ago, a cadre of people in this kind of soup of occult perennialist, mixing religions together. They will talk about something from Islam, and then something from the Hindu or Buddhist, or then Catholic. They will mix it all together.
yes,
uh,
exactly.
and yeah, it's amazing, and it's really something that's taking off right now.
I see the exact same pattern, the exact same template when I read the manifesto of the Norwegian terrorist, right-wing terrorist Anders Behring
Oh,
Breivik. If people remember that,
yes.
he shot up an island full of teenagers, and he also attacked the government with a huge bomb. And now, at the
And
time,
he traveled to the former Soviet Union, where he had
exactly,
contacts with the secret police.
exactly, the government said he was a lone guy. He was acting as a lone wolf, but there's so much documented evidence against this. So he cobbled together this very large manifesto, and he got these pieces from different authors in different places from different times, but you can always tell it is all these sources. It's all the same one template. And Breivik's idea, of course, was to create this pan-European, Eurasian empire, a new Roman empire, a pagan empire of sorts. And Breivik was also very fascinated with the aristocracy. He bought some old uniforms. He bought these costumes. I think he even became a Freemason, and he liked. There are photos of him in this aristocratic uniform. So whenever you look, it's always the same thing. And it's just when Julius Evola, he kind of marketed himself as a nobleman, as a baron, but he really wasn't. And that's kind of something we saw in Breivik. We saw also with the Nazi leadership. They believed in what they called spiritual racism. So that means it's really nice to have that lineage. If your family goes back hundreds of years or maybe 1,000 years, that's super cool. But the conviction is what's important. If you adopt the program, if you believe what this pattern tells you to believe, then you're in. You're part of this group, and you will have access to this occult power. And there's this occult plan. So this is a very important aspect of this. So thereby, these people are recruiting new members who are not from aristocratic families. It's you can be a fighter, a warrior for this plan as a regular guy. Very, very important aspect. And so this Julius Evola, he rebelled against his Catholic upbringing, which is something we've seen a lot in Europe over many hundreds of years. Same with Adam Weishaupt from the Bavarian Illuminati. Now, some people say, well, but he had a Catholic upbringing. He was in a Catholic school. Yes, but check out who his mentors were. They were connected to various secret societies, and this is not something that you should misinterpret. They were all rebelling against the church and what they thought of as the system they lived in. So they either complained about the Enlightenment or they complained about the state of traditional empires. They said this was in a state of decay. Very important aspect in Adolf Hitler's book Mein Kampf. You know, he talks about Austria. And if you've ever been to Austria or you watch some videos on YouTube about Vienna and everything, or you maybe get to visit it someday, you will see these Roman temples. It's all over. It's all over Austria. The Austrian nobility, they saw themselves as the successors of ancient Rome, but Hitler thought they were becoming too weak. They were becoming too lame. They lost the old ways. Therefore, you need a Nazi movement, and you need to bring fresh people into this movement using the exact same pattern. Now, the books of Evola, they were published in Germany.
The 1930s.
Yeah, exactly, in the 1930s. And even the so-called court magician of the SS, Mr. Willigood, he was a big fan of Julius Evola, and he invited him to Berlin.
In fact, the SS invited Evola to come and lecture.
Exactly, exactly.
And he worked with them on this project of gathering this library of all sort of a research library on all the occult organizations in Europe, all the Masonic lodges and so on. That was a project dear to Himmler's heart. And they were gathering these materials in Italy. And of course, as the American forces threatened to take Rome, Evola fled and they moved the archive up to Vienna, where it was captured by the Soviet Union in 1945 by the Red Army.
Yeah, and it's like when you read these books, I mean, obviously they put some stuff in there that's sometimes partially true, right? They speak in a general sense about the decay and they complain about socialism. They complain about the many problems of democracy in Europe at various times. So they put some stuff in it that is true. But that's to be expected of capable propaganda. You need to put some stuff in there that's true in order to sell the actual program. in order to sell the real program, you need to put some stuff in there that's true and that speaks to people, that speaks to conservatives, that speaks to patriots. That's how these books were constructed. Now, in the First World War, Evola served as an artillery officer, and this experience or this whole deal had a great influence on him. Same with Hitler. Hitler fought in the First World War, and afterwards he was kind of insane for a while. I mean, clinically insane, as documented by the doctors that treated him, and even people from my family. Now, I've shown the pictures before on this show. You know, some old family pictures. This was my my father's uncle, and he's got his own Wikipedia page now. Is Theo Benesch. He was leading the NSDAP party in Bavaria. He was also a young kid in World War One, and he came back and he was kind of nuts. And then he discovered the propaganda, the books, the conspiracy stuff, the big plan, right? So that's how they all got into this. Now, Julius Evola, he was probably a bit out of his mind, depressed and scared of the future. So he experimented with hallucinogenic drugs and magic. And he talks about how this was very dangerous for him. So this almost ended his career or his life, right? And he was suicidal, and he was talking about the contemporary dark age, the Kali Yuga. So we're in this bad era, this bad materialistic era.
The Kali Yuga is an Indian concept of these ages. That there are golden ages, and then there's the Kali Yuga. And we are in the Kali Yuga, is a period where people have a lot of technology and a lot of wealth, material wealth, but they're spiritually impoverished. And this is in his book, Revolt Against the Modern World. Evola has republishes the old Hindu prophecy about the Kali Yuga, which is rather remarkable because it does seem to describe our era. Appendix on the Dark Age. And this is worth reading because it so astonishingly parallels our time. And this is what moved some of these people to think like this.
Yeah.
This is from the Vishnu Purana, and it's outcasts and barbarians will be the masters of the banks of the Indus, Darvika and Chandrabhaga, and the Kashmir. These will be the contemporary rulers of this age, reigning over the earth. Kings of violent temper, they will seize upon the property of their subjects. They will be of limited power and will, for the most part, rapidly rise and fall. Their lives will be short, their desires insatiable, and they will display but little piety. The people of various countries intermingling with them will follow their example. The prevailing caste will be the Shudra. Vaishyas will abandon agriculture and commerce and gain a livelihood by servitude or the exercise of mechanical arts. And he puts in brackets proletarianization and industrialization. And of course, he's talking about the different castes in India. The Kshatriyas, instead of protecting, will plunder their subjects, and under the pretext of levying customs, will rob merchants of their property. Wealth and piety will decrease day by day until the whole world will be wholly depraved. Then property alone will confer rank. Well, we see that now. Wealth, material wealth, will be the only source of devotion. Passion will be the sole bond of union between the sexes. Falsehood will be the only means of success in litigation. Earth will be venerated but for its mineral treasures, exploitation of the soil, demise of the cult of the earth. And it goes on. And it kind of reminds you of modern civilization.
Yeah.
So, and that's why and of course, in Revolt Against the Modern World, he's saying there's something wrong with modern civilization. And he goes back to the pattern of pagan Rome, of the empire, and he talks about perhaps the most valid concept he has is that in all ancient societies, you had the priest who's talking to God. Under him, you have the king and the warrior caste. And then you have the merchant class, and then you have the proletariat and the peasants at the bottom. And of course the slaves at the very bottom. Well, what he says in here is that it's the inversion of the orders. Now we want the lowest on top, and the people who are spiritual are at the very bottom. They're not wanted, and the warrior caste is below the merchant caste. So they're just bureaucrats who work
Yeah.
for the army. And so what he says is this basic idea of rank order has been inverted. There is some truth to that in terms of traditional society. So this is why he talks about tradition. But of course, what's odd is that Evola doesn't really believe in a real former
Mm.
belief system or tradition. His belief is a kind of modern rendering of, in abstract terms, what traditional society is.
Yeah,
And
because
this
he's
is what
not an
perhaps appeals
aristocrat,
to Dugin.
because
Yeah.
he does not have the so-called birthright. He does not have the lineage, but he still wants the power. He still wants the influence. He wants to be in a higher place in this hierarchy, and he thinks that his convictions earn him that place. And that's, as I mentioned, this is what Hitler believed. This is what other Nazis believed. And when the
Yeah.
British visited the Nazis early on, the British were appalled. They were saying, "Who are these people? Who are these
Where did they come from?
these
Well, and it's
lowlives?"
like Evola, the very bizarre idea is the mixing of, well, see, if you are meditating on ancient Indian society under the Aryans, or ancient Egypt, or imagine yourself in the mystery schools in Greece or ancient Rome, you're trying to recreate a world that you imagine is better than the world you're living in now. And so when he says revolt from the modern world, he's really rejecting what is, and he's imagining what has been could come again. And of course, Nietzsche very comically wrote, "We're not free to be a crab that walks backwards. We can't go back. There's only going further and further into decadence," is what Nietzsche wrote. We have to play out the hand that we've been dealt, and that leads somewhere. And history, although in general there are these patterns that repeat, there's a lot of new things in history. Things don't happen,
Yeah.
history repeats. Well, it really only rhymes. Um, but these people, they really think that they can somehow change the world. Evola, for example, when Mussolini was rescued by Otto Skorzeny, the SS commando, from captivity in some kind of chateau in the mountains in Italy. Um, of course, all the prominent Italian intellectuals and whatnot were summoned to Hitler's headquarters. The what was it? The Wolf's Lair, the Wolfschanze, right? And he was there, and he was arguing for a monarchy because he believed in monarchy, and with a kind of priest king, I guess, if you read his books. And of course, the thing is, Hitler was like, "No, we're going to make a Transalpine, we're going to make a republic." So Mussolini, in the latter part of the war, when they formed this North Italian Republic, Evola was just brokenhearted that they didn't make a
Mm.
monarchy. Of course, where are you going to get King Victor Emmanuel of Italy had gone over to the Allies? Where are you going to get a king? You're going to make some new kingdom out of whole cloth? Where's the tradition? That's kind of weird. There's like a
Yeah.
contradiction.
Yeah, and also this pragmatism that you just described, when things just don't go Mr. Evola's way. So, for example, King Victor Emmanuel, he was related to, I think, the Brits. He was related to some very other significant European noble lines. And
Yeah, the
Evola,
Italian monarchy, wasn't that unified Piedmont and Sardinia that formed
yeah.
Italy?
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
who unified, quote unquote, unified Italy? Mazzini and Garibaldi, who were also tied into these secret societies. I mean, history is not necessarily the way people like it to be. Evola is using a lot of historical arguments, which is very common in these ideological cults. They say the past was such and such. This is why we now have to do this, that, and the other.
They turn the past into a formula. If you read Evola, you see he turns the past into like a formula that has this geometry or this algebra. And if you just repeat that, you're going to magically poof. You're going to create something new. The problem is that like a lot of these Italian fascists who joined with the Axis in World War II, none of their thinking ever could be brought out practically in reality. Yeah. And it just ended up being this bloody massacre where the Italian regime and the Nazi regime, did very bad things.
Yeah, and if you look at if you look at, you can probably see that online too on YouTube, I think. If you look at the German National Museum, you see in many pieces of historical art, you see that blend of the Roman, the German, and even the Nordic, the Scandinavian. You can almost draw a vertical line almost through Europe, and this is kind of what happened after the end of the Western Roman Empire. So it's not like you have history as neat and tidy as you want it to be. But Evola, he probably wants to change history. He wants to magically say this is what history was, and if people believe him, that's then reality. Of course, if you want to be an occultist, if you want the entities to pay attention to you, you have to impress them. And before you have any significant power, you need to perform smaller acts of insanity and evil to be in contact with the entities. So, for example, Evola advocated that people follow the left-hand path, use dark, violent sexual powers against the modern world. For Evola, these virile heroes are both generous and cruel. They possess the ability to rule and commit Dionysian acts. Now that sounds very Dugin to me, especially this element.
That is Dugin. You're right.
That is exactly Dugin. And it's like, what else are these people going to do before they have extreme power, before they can kill a bunch of people, before they can make many people suffer? They have to do these smaller acts of evil in an occult sense, interpret that in an occult sense. Now Evola was not some low nut, not by any stretch of the imagination. So, for example, one of his main contacts was Arturo Regini. He was an initiate in the Memphis Rite, a brand of Freemasonry. Now, regular Masons will say, that's irregular, we've got nothing to do with that. Fair enough, but still, even regular Masons are also attracted to the ancient world, and there's also Egyptian influences in regular Masonry. It's not just the Memphis Mizraim Rite, to be precise.
Although they claim that it's Egyptian, and of course this is where Hermeticism comes in, but we don't really know that for sure. There has been some recent discoveries that have caused people to go back and look at the Hermetic texts and say, yeah, they're probably are based on older things that are from Egypt now. This is changing, but whatever the case, the fragments that we have, these guys are imagining or trying to reimagine a religion that's from a dead language that nobody speaks anymore, to create something that I think really is probably new and weird. And people are drawn to that.
Yeah, and if you want to make historical arguments, you have to be real arguments. You have to be an expert in history, and few people are, especially when it's older history, which is hard to reconstruct, especially the intelligence level or the occult level of the past. Now, so in science, we've made some great progress with the scientific method. We looked at things, and oftentimes these things that we looked at contradicted what we had thought so far. So we get surprised, and surprises are oftentimes useful to make progress. But somebody like Evola or Dugin or all these other guys that are using the same pattern, the same template, they don't want to be surprised. They don't want anything to disturb their interpretation of everything, right? And this is where this spiritual racism comes in. It's not just if you don't follow the program, if you're not on board with the program, they will not just hate you, they will mix it in with traditional conspiracy ideology. They will say that you are in a Jewish spirit or that you are quote unquote Jewish. This is kind of their logic. Now, people have
Oh,
called.
yeah, there's so many different this, and this, of course, goes to this guy who is, he's very talented, E. Michael Jones. He's a very bright guy. The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit and Its Impact on World History. This book is crazy. He's got that anti-Semitic obsession that the Jews are really the central problem. And of course, he comes from a very strange, very old Catholic point of view that the Jews are the murderers of Christ and that their revolt against God is the core revolt of all history. It's a very strange. He has gone to Iran, for example, and been involved with anti-Semitic conferences there. He has been involved with Duginites and the whole Dugin thing. He takes a pro-Russian approach in the Ukrainian-Russian war. He is one of the people on this. And again, it's so strange. Although Evola says maybe Catholicism could reconstitute traditional order, he actually says that in some place in The Revolt of the Modern World. But he's pagan. But yet, this guy Jones is Catholic. And then you've got Sufis, Muslims who are into this, who basically become Duginites, and of course Hindus and Jews. There's Kabbalists Jews that are into a kind of Jewish version of
Mystery
a
school.
kind of wing, yeah, mystery school, right wing, yeah, because there's these traditions and Jewish mysticism, and of course all these people, except for perhaps Jones, although he's getting involved with these people is suggestive. A lot of these people are perennialists. That is, that they will do. There was a book. What was it? It was The Perennial Philosophy, written by Aldous Huxley. Gosh, that must have been 60, 70 years ago. It's an interesting book. It's largely about Buddhist and Catholic spiritual practices and similarities in the teachings, saying that there's this core teaching about the soul and the spirit, and about what is God, different way of talking about God. Buddhists are kind of an atheistic religion where they don't have God, but he tries to make the argument that they're talking about the same experience of the divine. They're just talking about it in a different way. So this has evolved. This idea of perennialism has evolved through these people, and it's been politicized. So that where if you read Aldous Huxley, there's no ideology. There's nothing ideological in Huxley. He wrote Brave New World famously, as those people would remember, which is a very romantic attack on modern totalitarianism and rationalist politics. But Dugin, it's interesting, and the Eurasianists and this Russian-controlled movement, they want to politicize perennialism. They want to politicize all religions, and because they want to create this super state, this Eurasianist state. They want to be able to include Nazis and Jews and anti-Semites and Jews, Hindus and Catholics, Buddhists and Muslims. They want to be able to include everybody, which is, if you think about it, it's kind of Russian, because the Russian Empire had all these religions and groups in it, right?
Yeah, it's
they had Muslims in the
south.
In the south, and of course in Muslim Central Asia, they had Buddhists. In the east, of course, there was the Christians in the west, and even Catholics in Ukraine. So it's a funny project.
Yeah, it's a funnel. I always compare it to a marketing funnel. It's like you can enter the funnel at any specific point, but over time you will end up in the same direction. Now, I've been called a Jew, even though I come from a prominent Nazi family, so that makes no sense at all. But these extremists don't care, because they go by this Evola logic. if you're not on board with their program, you are part of this satanic Jewish revolutionary conspiracy. Yet, when we
Spiritual aristocracy,
yeah,
right?
but if we look at some of these people that Evola ran with, hung out with, if you look at Mazzini and Garibaldi and their who unified Italy, and we look at their Masonic contacts all over Europe, I mean these old nobility circles who were also very into the ancient mystery schools. These circles, they perfected the revolutionary game, the intelligence techniques. So they played the revolutionary game. It's not a Jewish invention at all. This is a silly idea to say that everything was classic imperialism, and then came the Jews, and then all these revolutions started. It's ridiculous. I mean, anybody who knows anything about the intelligence world and intelligence techniques should be able to look at this and make sense of it, because I always tell these conspiracy guys, and I'll get to that in a minute about Evola. I always say these conspiracy guys, please tell me what special techniques these Jews supposedly had. What magic special intelligence techniques did they invent or did better than anybody else at the time? And then they hem and they haw and like, well, they had a courier system. They were funneling information with couriers, and they had pigeons that transported letters and stuff like that. I'm thinking, you don't have any significant answer to this question. You don't know. You can't point to any specific techniques invented or perfected by Jews that they did better than anybody else. So this guy that Evola was hanging out with, his most important contact, as far as we know, Evola's contact, Arturo Regini, was not just a member of the Memphis Mizraim Rite of Freemasonry. This guy was also admitted to the regular Scottish Rite Masonic lodge called Lucifero in Florence, affiliated to the Grand Orient of Italy. Now, when we look at Scottish Masonry, it's, as far as we can tell, really older than English Masonry. And this gets into a whole bit of, interesting bit in history, and these people used intelligence techniques. They got into Denmark, they got into Scotland, and they got into England. They played a revolutionary game. This is just the intelligence game. It's just intelligence techniques.
And
so
it's for political power.
Yeah, so don't think for a minute you can follow the simplistic Julius Evola logic. Everything was warriors and kings and paganism, and then came the Jews and democracy and blah 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 blah. It's so simplistic. It appeals to people who are looking for these easy answers, and these guys.
There's also a relationship. What Dugin has done is he's brought in these modern things that come out of Marxism, like deconstructionism. I remember I had to sit through a lecture of Jacques Derrida at UC Irvine. What was it, 35 years ago or 37 years ago? So what deconstructionism does is it basically deconstructs what is, the structures, which really all the structures in our world that make up our complex civilization are structures of the mind. They're ideas, ideals, they're understandings, very deep things that have been evolved through folkways through thousands of years and through trial and error and through the institutions that we have arrived at. And of course, to deconstruct everything is in a way the same thing the Marxists want to do in their revolution, is to level, is to destroy, and then to rebuild, to make the world new. And what Duginism does, this is a brilliant book on Dugin, Charles Upton's Dugin Against Dugin. And Upton, of course, is a Sufist who is kind of came out of the beatnik generation left in the 1960s out of the Bay Area, and he has this. He discovers God, and he decides that there's a lot of evil out here, and that this political ideology stuff is wrong. And so he's looking at Dugin, and he's a traditionalist, and he says Alexander Dugin draws his metaphysical perspective more directly from the works of Martin Heidegger than from any other source. René Guénon, we haven't mentioned him. He was, and of course, Evola was sort of the Italian rendering of Guénon, who is French, who started this sort of perennialist esotericism. And he said that, so what he's saying is that Martin Heidegger, who was a pro-Hitler philosopher, a very significant German philosopher, who was also against metaphysics. And this is the point that he says, the fact that it makes sense that Dugin would use Heidegger because Heidegger's really a deconstructionist, is what Upton argues. This is unfortunate since Heidegger was not a metaphysician, but rather an obscure, ambiguous, tortured deconstructionist of everything that the word metaphysics had represented before he got his hands on it. I challenge anyone who has read with sufficient comprehension 2 pages of the Tao Te Ching or Meister Eckhart to then try to go back and read Martin Heidegger without a sensation of terminal barrenness, comparable to being abandoned in the bed of a dry salt lake on a cold gray winter day. Um, the thing is that Dugin's spirituality is empty. There's a nihilism here, and you will hear people who like to study these things going and saying it's all turned into political ideology.
Yeah, yeah. It's
right?
It's a means to an end. It's like we have somebody put together this template that Dugin is now also using, and this template was created for specific purposes, and that's how it was constructed. They want you to play a part in their plan. They want to use you for their plan, and you're not supposed to know what the actual objectives are, and they don't want you to know what your true place in the future will be in this future hierarchy which they are creating.
And they like to go after average people who are
Oh, yeah.
frustrated with the way things are.
Yeah, and of course it's of course people get frustrated. This is a very important aspect, but you have to ask yourself, how can you make sense of things? How can you make yourself more useful? How can you make yourself more productive, and change your position and change the impact that you have? Now, it's in this Evola logic. It's all very simple, right? It says here, Evola frequently used the term Aryan to refer to the nobility, not the average dude out there, not the average white guy. Right? This is a very important distinction. Evola was saying, Evola was using this term Aryan in a specific way. He referred to the nobility, not the average white guy. And it's Evola wrote the foreword and an essay in the second Italian edition of the fake Protocols of the Elders of Zion, published in 1938 by the Catholic fascist Giovanni Preziosi, right? And so they created this spiritual, or this meta anti-Semitism. Evola said, a person can be Aryan but have a Jewish soul, and a person can be Jewish but have an Aryan soul. This is exactly what you just described like a few minutes ago. They will recruit Jewish people for their plan if they follow along with the program. But if you're a white guy, even if you come from a Nazi family, even if you have blue eyes or blue-green eyes, they will still call you a Jew or somebody with a Jewish soul if you don't follow along their plan, if you won't help them with their insane plan and their insane ideas. Now, there's a new edition out, actually from this year. Believe it or not, this is a new edition, a new translation of Pagan Imperialism by Julius Evola. And they say it's a better translation. They say there's the appendices have finally been added, and there's context and notes and all that stuff. And this is as every book of his. This is a condemnation against the modern world, and he means by that, to a large degree, the Enlightenment, right? New things and some of the things that have turned out to be very useful for the average person, very, very healthy. But this is his big accusation. And so it says here, Evola views Christianity as a weakening force that has replaced the proud, heroic spirit of paganism with submission and servitude to an alien deity. He envisions a revival of an empire built on the blood and fire of ancient rites, where the ruler embodies divine authority and the sacred order is restored. Now, do people really believe, let's say, Vladimir Putin? Putin is a god. He's a god king.
He's a heroic figure,
Yeah,
not
he's just a
not a
guy.
KGB bureaucrat.
Yeah, he's a guy. He's just a dude, right? And his health is failing, and he's done some significant KGB work, but it's not too different from many others that have served in the KGB. And Putin is lacking essential skills of being a ruler. He's lacking skills that certain kings possessed, or an understanding of certain things, or a competence in
He
many
seems to
things.
lack he seems to lack a genuine empathy for his own people
Yes, exactly.
because what he's putting them through. I mean, and then the lot, the truth. This is the thing about Evola and formulas: is it true? It has this sound. It rounds things out. It makes the world seems to make sense with it, but it's not true, and it's not. There's no love in it. There's no beauty in it. There's nothing noble in it. He talks about nobility all the time. Where is the nobility in an empire where you're crushing people, and where you're crushing people for what? Some empty notion of 4 ages, and you're going to get through the Kali Yuga faster.
Yeah.
This is almost the historicism of Marx placed in other terms. It's very cold, it's very cruel, and there's a lust for power embedded in it. And you will always find this with it. Where is the love? Where is the creation of something that's organic? He likes to talk about initiation, but who initiated him? Where is this initiation? Where is this grace from God that he has, or any of these people had? He supported Mussolini and Hitler. Where's grace in that? And then after the war, to be bitter and to be preaching this stuff, there's no grace.
Yeah, and also if when people started to glorify glorify Adolf Hitler, and even in later decades, people glorified with this template, glorified Hitler, even though Hitler was just a guy, and Hitler could have lost the war in so many different ways. He lost the intelligence game. He was outproduced by the Americans because there was freedom in America, and there was people got decent wages, and America was out innovating the Germans, right? Because the
And,
Germans
and
had.
Hitler's ideas were basically shallow and wrong,
Yeah, and all this occult,
basically.
the what we talked about in the last episode, this insane occult logic of Hitler and also the communists. When they try to communicate with entities by creating death and misery and destruction, so the entities would notice you, and they wanted to be wasteful because gods can be wasteful, because the universe can seem wasteful, and so wastefulness is a symbol of power. This is not what Evola is describing here. These
But by the
actual
way,
real world
before
rulers.
Evola wrote books like A Revolt Against the Modern World and Pagan Imperialism, he wrote mainly books about the occult, about, I think, alchemy and tarot and magic. I think those are the books. I've seen a couple of them. They're hard to get through because they're filled with this mumbo jumbo. But it's look, ancient magical thinking, or coming from ancient Egypt, Hermeticism. It's sort of based on and alchemy. It's based on correspondences of ideas and symbols, right? And these correspondences, there's a reality there. I think Carl Jung's psychology shows that there's you do dream association. Things are related to each other. Ideas. There's some truth in Plato and Platonism. So, but what they've done is they've taken it and they're trying to use these things. They're trying to weaponize them to use Platonism, to use the occult, to use Hermeticism, to build a political, I guess you could say, a Tower of Babel or a political ladder to heaven. And this is really dangerous because whether you're a Marxist doing it intellectually or you're a Nazi doing it with some kind of secret SS rights, or you're Evola and these Italian Masons trying to bolster the Mussolini regime, it's just a bunch of murderous gangs trying to justify themselves using hocus pocus, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, of course, when you see the advertising for this new edition, 2024 edition of Evola's book, Pagan Imperialism, if you look at the advertising, it says this: Pagan imperialism is a provocative manifesto for those who dream of a return to a world rooted in the fierce esoteric traditions of the past. And if it gives you these simplistic ideas and thinking patterns, obviously it's a trap. Now, we all know that you can mobilize masses of people who are uneducated or less educated or have serious gaps in their education. But don't believe for a minute that if you follow these people into this trap, that it's going to go well for you. I mean, it didn't go well for so many people who became part of Nazism or communism. And it says this new edition of Julius Evola's book Pagan Imperialism, that just happened to be released this year, is a brand new translation by Heinrich Matterhorn, combining the original 1928 edition with the 1933 German edition, the Nazi era edition. It also includes Evola's extensive appendix. This edition is significantly longer than previous English translations and is enriched, as they call it, with detailed footnotes that provide definitions as well as commentary on different concepts and ideas mentioned in the text. Now, of course, there's variations of this kind of propaganda. Some variations of this are even more reduced, more simple. But what I see with this new right wing, this pro-Russian right wing, they want to appeal to some of these slightly more educated, slightly more clever people, and they make it sound more clever, but it's still the same simplistic template. It's still the same old easy, primitive trap, right? And it says in the book, Pan-European Unity based on pagan imperialism. Evola disliked the US and USSR. Okay, so he
hated the United States. I think he had a very special hatred of the United States.
Yeah, even though there's some Roman roots in America. We all saw what the Americans were capable of, not just outproducing the Nazis, but also out-innovating and creating a better life for many people, right? But he hated the U.S.
Freedom, the idea of a republic that brings freedom to people and that allows this incredible creativity.
And he doesn't...
They don't... People like Evola, these fascists, they don't understand the importance of checks and balances, the importance of how power corrupts, and as Lord Acton had said,
exactly,
power
because he's never led anything. He's never built anything substantial. He's never led anything. He's never seen what can go wrong and what you need to pay attention to.
It's funny. He saw what went wrong during the Third Reich and the Axis, and yet he claimed that they were the side that should have won.
Yeah, right? But also these neo-Nazis, and this is a much bigger movement now than people can ever imagine. That's why we're talking about this.
People don't realize this stuff is not. There is an undercurrent of a Nazi revival.
It's crazy, and the Russians are in on it. The Russians are also behind it, and it's like
the Russians are behind it. Absolutely, they are.
And so Evola, he doesn't really talk about the occult core of the USSR, right? And also Rome. Let's look at Rome for a second. Rome was highly dependent on money and trade, the numbers game. How many troops can you pay, train, and equip? If the calculation of Rome fails, Rome fails. So how can he come up with this stupid conspiracy argument, all the Jewish spirit of trade and merchants and peaceful exchange that ruined everything?
Yeah. How could the Italian Navy compete with the British Navy? The British
Right.
Navy basically just sunk it
Right, and it's like
over
Rome. If
time.
I mean, we know so much more now about ancient Rome because they were really cagey with their numbers. Right, there's not that many actual numbers that we get. What cost what? Right, because they had to keep numbers oftentimes secret because if the enemy got wind of the actual numbers of the Roman Empire, that would be dangerous. Right, because Rome had to squeeze the peasants to pay for the soldiers to be able to defend the Roman Empire. But Rome also used trade to expand its power. It wasn't all just bloodshed and magic, esoteric, fierce power and killing people all the time. There was trade, and this was an integral part of the Roman system. So how can you make that argument that, modern trade, this and that, and the British Empire, they had banks, and the British Empire, they had an international trade, international dimension to it, and this was all Jewish decay, blah blah blah. It makes no sense whatsoever. And there's a lot of talk about tradition, but who is a true expert on post-Roman empires in Europe, especially the reconstruction of the intelligence level in the networks, the reconstruction of the occult that went on in Europe after the end of the Western Roman Empire. So was Evola an expert? Did he want to be an expert? He wanted to be an occultist. He didn't want to really get into history, right? This is something very, very different. Evola talks about the rebellion of the old nobility against the modern world. Well, I hate to break it to people, but the old nobility built significant parts of the modern world, especially the parts of the banking system and internationalism, right? It's not what he thinks it was. This is like some of these old nobility networks. They were really powerful. They were much bigger than people imagine. And it's documented how big they were in terms of members. And now we understand better the intelligence capabilities of these old and oftentimes these old networks that were really, really big fans of the ancient mystery schools, right? So it's not like Jews invented banking, Jews invented a central bank, Jews invented the merchant banks. No, they didn't. Especially not in the British
Look
Empire.
at the Medicis. The Medicis were, Italians.
Yeah, and this whole stupid Rothschild fairy tale mythology, they took over Britain, blah blah blah. They didn't. They were recruited. The first Rothschild was recruited by the Landgraf of Hessen-Kassel, who was related to the British throne. Very old family cluster. They needed some people to run certain aspects of the operation. That means the Rothschilds, they probably didn't really own any of it. They were supposed to run it, keep it in this tight family for a few generations, serve this purpose. Not a Jewish invention. And all this crazy fairy tale nonsense about the Battle of Waterloo and the Rothschilds scamming the stock
really
market.
Nonsense.
Utterly, completely false. Not true at all. Absolutely not true. If the Rothschilds had misbehaved in Britain, that would have been the end of them. Absolutely the end of them. So, it's like, Evola's book, Pagan Imperialism, was published in Germany in 1933, so the beginning of the Nazi Empire, in the Armanen publishing house. Evola traveled to Berlin in 1934 and addressed the German aristocracy in Heinrich von Gleichen's Gentleman's Club. Now, this interesting guy, Mr. von Gleichen, he was creating a whole network in various cities. They called themselves rings, and they were copying British clubs, and they were copying English masonry. And this was a very interesting club because its members became very powerful, very, very powerful in Germany. For example, Heinrich Brüning and Franz von Papen. Franz von Papen, he was the Reichschancellor in 1932, right? Wilhelm von Geil, also a member of this ring club. von Geil, he became the Minister of the Interior in 1932. So this was not a little gentleman's club. This was not just a little hobby Masonic lodge. These guys were serious, okay? And so this is the club that was hooking up with Julius Evola. And the guy who's running this network, this ring club, Mr. von Gleichen, this is a very old family, goes back a couple of hundred years. They call themselves Uradel. Now, the Evola and his friends and his partners, they even created a club that's called Ur. This is a very old word. In essence, it means very, okay? So very old means uralt. But there's also a subtext meaning. It's kind of a mythical, magical subtext meaning. If something is ur, it's kind of mysterious, and not just old, but mysterious, right? It's grand, it's mysterious and dark. So this nobility guy, Mr. von Gleichen, his family was friends with was friends with Friedrich von Schiller, the world famous, probably probably the second most famous German author of all times. It was Goethe, which we talked about in the last episode, and it was Schiller. Mm-hmm. And so this von Gleichen aristocrat, he was very, very close to Mr. Schiller. And of course, Schiller and Goethe both were tied into the Illuminati of Bavaria and these German Masonic lodges. Very creepy. And so Evola influenced the so-called court magician of the SS, Karl Maria Willigut. Willigut became SS Oberführer and SS Brigadeführer. Willigut was so happy about Evola, he even wrote to Heinrich Himmler and said, "You gotta check out this guy because this guy's terrific, right?" That's who these guys were. And Evola hates, for the most part, Semites, even though in Mesopotamia we had large empires, pagan empires, occult empires even. So how can he make that East-West distinction and say, well, the Western empires, like the Romans, they were the good ones, the cool ones, but then came the Jewish influence, the Semitic influence, and ruined us in the West? How can he make that distinction? That makes absolutely no historic sense whatsoever.
Well, he's trying to fit in with his SS buddies.
Yeah, he wants to make them happy.
One of the things Himmler was charged with was creating a new religion. And this is what his Finnish doctor said, who saw his car. He had the library car on his personal train filled with religious books. And Himmler admitted to this doctor that he was tasked by the Fuhrer with creating a new religion. And we find that Dugin now is in this same kind of role vis-a-vis Putin and all of these perennialists. And in fact, Dugin has actually proclaimed that Eurasianism is a religion.
Yeah, it is.
Did you know that? Yeah, and so he's explicitly declared it as a religion. And Upton quotes Father Seraphim Rose, who wrote a great book on nihilism, by the way. Father Seraphim Rose was from the Bay Area. He was a Eastern Orthodox Christian priest, and he said that on looking at these developments in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s, he said Satan has walked into the modern world naked. He's just come right in, and people are embracing Satan. What is a disguised form of Satanism? And I think when you look at Dugin, this is a tempting answer to what he's doing, because there's something evil, something wicked, and there's an inappropriate pursuit of power and empire taking place here.
I see people treat it as a religion. It's amazing how it gives them purpose, it gives them community, it gives them drive and hope and a place, and it gives them a whole false history, and it gives them everything they crave. People treat this, I mean, especially in Europe, they treat this like a religion so much. And I was surprised to see how fast this gained traction in the US, because the US is in many ways different than Europe, right? It's I was hoping for a better defense against this stuff, because why would Americans go back to this insanity that was happening all over Europe? Because we had these competing aristocrats. They all wanted to be Rome. They all claimed to be the new Rome, the successor of Rome, and they tried to outdo each other. And this nobility that Evola is talking about, parts of it, especially some of these German clusters, right? These post-Roman German clusters of nobility, some of them, they actually try to subvert and control the Enlightenment. This is a significant aspect of history that almost nobody has ever tried to look at. It's not like old empires, everything was great, then came the Jewish spirit and everything became miserable, and democracies and blah blah blah. These nobility guys, especially these German kings or German-based kings in Britain, they were not sitting by. They were not letting the Rothschilds take over Britain. They were not going to let everything slip away. They tried as hard as they could to subvert the Enlightenment in Europe, try to control it as much as they can. And of course, these structures that were created, the new British banking system, the bond market, this internationalism of the British Empire, that system created many losers, right? And so it was clear that these so-called losers of the system would become angry and they would rebel. And guess what happens? The same nobility, these same nobility networks, they tried also to control that rebellious spirit. So they would control both sides of this political argument, both sides of this political battle. So there was a lot of fake pseudo rebellion against the Enlightenment. So you control parts of the Enlightenment, you control parts of the anti-Enlightenment. This is how the game is played. You don't wait around till a rebellion happens. You want to be on top of it as early as you can. And this is something that either Evola was not aware of, or he was not saying it because it was not useful to him and his people to say it. They needed this rebellion. They wanted to have it and use it. Now, I have this new translation here in front of me, and it says this: where the monarchy, found in hands no longer capable of wielding a sword and scepter, has been overthrown due to the intrigues of the Jewish rabble, that's the Rothschild myth, and merchants, which existed in Rome, it must be restored. Where it still exists by inertia, it must be renewed. That's Hitler's logic. Strengthened and made dynamic as an organic, central, and absolute function, embodying simultaneously the power of strength and the light of the spirit in a unique being, one that truly acts on behalf of an entire lineage and at the same time transcends everything conditioned by earth and blood. I mean, this is PR talk. I mean, how many buzzwords can you possibly put into a sentence? Only then will there...
that's when you know you're being manipulated, when you hear these different things. Look, there's when you talk about Evola's being a kind of magician who Mussolini was afraid of, who would go to Hitler's headquarters and give advice, you're talking about a person who exercised some influence, who had some importance, who then tried to leave these books behind. You know, I think he died in the 1970s, tried to leave this legacy, and you've got Dugin trying to revive it. And of course, Evola is a pagan. Dugin claims to be an Orthodox Christian. He's got followers who like Kabbalah and study Judaism. He's got followers who are Sufis and into Islam. But yet, by his associations, he is really spitting on Christianity. He is spitting on Judaism. He is spitting on Islam. In reality, and of course, this goes to the death of his daughter. Uh, Dugin is really very offensive in his manipulations to people who seriously believe in certain things. Who was it? Was it the Putinist that killed his daughter as to create a martyr to energize people? Was it angry Muslims who were upset that Dugin had been trying to trick them into this perennialism? Or was it some other angry group that had seen through his deception? Um, these are questions I don't know the answer to. But this you can't manipulate people in favor of a very nasty empire like Russia, the Russian Federation, with a dictator who is murdering people, selectively assassinating people. And you could read with Russia from Russia with Blood. You could read about the assassination of Anna Politkovskaya or Alexander Litvinenko, and there's hundreds of others, ordered assassinations, and then the massacre of the Ukrainians and the kidnapping of 20,000 Ukrainian children. I mean, and this is being proposed as with in the same breath that this is sacred, this is truth, this is deep philosophical understanding. I mean,
Yeah, I mean
and people fall for this?
this guy's
Really?
this guy's understanding of war and empire, it seems to be stuck somewhere in the distant past when armies were 300,000 people and 50,000 horses, right? Or sometimes even smaller, when you couldn't use your whole force at the same time. When you had to split it up and you had 20,000 soldiers there and 30,000 over there and 50,000 over there. Things were simpler back then, and you cannot use this old simplistic understanding in the modern age when we have weapons of mass destruction, when we have armies that are millions of people, and we have new technology to kill people and biological weapons and other types of weapons. It's like you can't use an outdated concept like this in a wrong way.
Well,
Maybe.
there is a devaluation, just like in Karl Marx and just like in Hitler, there's a devaluation of logic in what Dugin and Evola are doing. They've got to get you to devalue logic, that is your own rational mind and understanding it. If they can get you there, and I talked about this technique last week, the cognitive dissonance is an actual communist technique where if they can get you to believe things that are completely impossible to be together, then they can get you to do anything, to accept anything, to be a part of any crime, basically, because your ability then to judge has broken down completely. And this is a form of mind control. It's actually a technique. And I think that it's employed when people, when I was advising uh, in the debate that Olavo de Carvalho had with Dugin years ago, I gave him advice. I told Olavo, don't treat Dugin like a real philosopher. It's not sincere. He's not really doing philosophy. He's not doing what Socrates did by questioning, honestly questioning. He's not doing what Plato or Aristotle did. He's not a philosopher. He's a propagandist for an empire. He's manipulating, he's using mind control techniques. So you have to treat him like what he is. And I think that's what we have to do with a lot of this stuff, is that they are attempting to create an ideology which is false, in which it's all about power and it's about getting self-affirmation, just like Eric Voegelin said, self-affirmation or a sense of identity from murdering or
Yeah.
killing other people, trampling them down. That's what's really at the essence of all this, whether it's Nazism, communism, Evolaism, paganism, in these forms, these formulas. And anybody can take, by the way, a religion and they can twist it into a cult. They can
And
change it and make it a political instrument.
they love paradoxes. They love paradoxical things. They get really giddy when something seems paradoxical or sounds paradoxical. Now, normally in
And
science,
that is exactly, and you talk about dialectics in Marxism, but that's exactly what cognitive dissonance does.
yeah, because normally when you encounter something paradoxical in science, be it historical science, political science, whatever science, you encounter something paradoxical or it seems paradoxical. It means that maybe you've made a mistake. Somewhere there is a mistake. You have to rectify that error, and then it makes sense. It's not paradoxical anymore. Or you haven't really understood the complexities of the issues yet. It may seem paradoxical to you now, but the more you get into it, the seeming paradox will vanish at some point, right? But just
right, and a good example of this is Evola's teaching on Eurasianism. He says, this is a quote of not Evola, Dugin's preaching of a Eurasianism. He says, truly, Eurasianism turns out to be that moment when you implement the unpleasant command of a leader exercising your own whim, right? And when the command corresponds with your whim, your wishes with the movement of your soul. That is true Eurasianism, when absolute freedom merges into the inseparable synthesis with absolute discipline.
Oh, come on. I mean, this is O'Brien. This is O'Brien in Orwell's 1984 saying, if I tell you I can fly in this room, I can fly in this room because I will torture you to the point where you believe it. And 2 + 2 = 5. We can make up anything.
And
anything
how many
like.
fingers am I holding up, right?
It's like,
and there's a rat going to eat your eyeball out if you don't tell me the wrong number.
It's O'Brien, and it says he talks about, Evola is talking about liberty or freedom in his own definition of the word. It says this: as strange as it may seem. Now that's an introduction. As strange as it may seem, he means as paradoxical as it may seem, the foundation of our imperialism includes values that also appear to underpin the liberal forms of democracy. The difference lies in the fact that in liberalism, these values are asserted by a race of slaves who do not dare to think them through to their fullest extent for and within the individual, but instead illegitimately and egalitarianly transfer them to society and humanity. In doing so, they lose their original meaning and transform into errors. According to their first immortal principle, quote unquote, they claim to have ushered in the era of liberty. In reality, it is nothing. They do not understand what liberty means. If they did, they would also understand that to desire liberty is to desire the empire. Liberty does not tolerate compromises. It must be fully affirmed or not at all. What? I mean, they want to totally control you and call that liberty.
That's what
do you say?
George Orwell, you look at George Orwell when his future English socialist state, it's freedom is slavery. Freedom is slavery. And of course, truth is, the ministry of truth is full of lies. And so these contradictions become necessary for the sake of power. This is why when you look at, this is what's really dangerous, when government or media or any major institution is saying the opposite of the truth, when there's no correspondence between what they say and the truth, or less and less correspondence, you're heading into slavery. You're heading into a very dangerous place, because we need the truth to be free, right? You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They're giving you lies. They're trying to enslave you. And they're telling you that the lies are the real freedom, and that the empire, this totalitarian entity, is the ultimate freedom and the truth at the same time. I mean, it's horrible.
It goes on like this. It says, an empire must then be conceived according to the indicated analogy of a unified body synthesized by a soul. The unity that such a body achieves, unlike that of a brute, is a higher principle that has an end in itself. It does not live for the needs of the body, but rather has the body as an instrument. It is not produced by the body, but vice versa, in the sense that the soul is the end, the profound organizing principle, blah, 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 of the body itself. But wait a minute. Why did the United States outproduce the Nazis and all the other nations combined that had entered World War II? Why was America so successful? Why were people in America so much happier and productive, and America was out innovating everybody else. According to his logic, it should have been the other way around. Fascism should have been like this super mega successful thing, and everything works as a body and a soul, blah blah blah. And America should have been failing, but that's not what happened. So that's, of course, that is an actual reality. Reality is contradicting what he's saying, but neo-Nazis and Eurasianists to this day, they still use the same old excuse. They say, well, Hitler lost because it wasn't fascist enough, because the Nazis were not enough of a soul in a body, and the Jewish spirit kind of was still in the world, and blah blah blah.
And yet America is, with its many churches, is more religious to this day than Europe or any of these people. Their religion is a fake, and so they don't have any real spirituality. And we've run out of time. Alex, did you have any last comments?
Well, there's so many books that this guy put out, and some of them are more practical in a sense. One is called like the Handbook for the Young Right, and
Yes.
there's books about the introduction into the magic and introduction into the occult. They want you really to be a part of this game, of this charade, of this trap, and it's like, no. You think people out there, they think there's so much different stuff on the internet, and you can pick and choose, and there's Russia over there, and now the Chinese, they also want your attention, and they want your help as well, and there's so many influencers, and you cannot even watch it all and listen to it all. There's so much stuff, but if you boil it down,
if they can place their poison in each one of these things,
yeah,
they're poisoning you.
It's
They're
like
getting through to you.
Somebody put up the script, everybody's copying the script, either because they have direct connections to these networks and they're being told use these talking points, or some freewheeling guys are just copying what they see because they like it and they think it's successful. That's the media reality that's on the internet right now. People think the internet is free and there's all kinds of rebellions going on the internet. The real knowledge, what really brings you success, that's still books. That's still books.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, I want to thank everybody for joining us on this session of Friends and Enemies. We've been talking about Julius Evola and Dugin and this Russian network that's exploiting this perennialism, trying to use all kinds of different religions and occult beliefs all at the same time. And how inconsistent it is, but yet they do it, and it seems to be spreading. So I'm Jeff Nyquist. This has been Friends and Enemies. My co-host, Alex Benesch. We thank you for being with us, and we hope you'll join us next week.